shadowed Private Orchard.
"King Lancelot," she said, "wants to be a worshipper of Mithras, and Arthur and I do not want him opposed."
I felt a flare of rage at my religion being taken so lightly. "Mithras, lady," I said coldly, "is a religion for the brave."
"Even you, Derval Cadern, do not need more enemies," Guinevere replied just as coldly.
So I knew she would become my enemy if I blocked Lancelot's desires. And doubtless, I thought, Guinevere would deliver the same message to any other man who might oppose Lancelot's initiation into the Mithraic mysteries. "Nothing will be done till winter," I said, evading a firm commitment.
"But make sure it is done," she said,
then pushed open the hall door.
"Thank you, Lord Derval."
"Thank you, lady," I said, and felt another surge of anger as I ran down the steps to the hall. 10 days, I thought. Just 10 days, and Lancelot had made Guinevere into his supporter. I cursed, vowing that I would become a miserable Christian before I ever saw Lancelot feasting in a cave beneath a bull's bloody head. I had broken 3 Saxon shield walls and buried Howlbane to her hilt in my country's enemies before I had been elected to Mithras's service, but all Lancelot had ever done was boast and posture. I entered the hall to find Bedwin seated beside Arthur. They were hearing petitioners, but Bedwin left the dais to draw me to a quiet spot beside the hall's outer door. "I hear you're a lord now," he said. "My congratulations." "A lord without land," I said bitterly, still upset by Guinevere's outrageous demand. "Land follows victory," Bedwin told me, "and victory follows battle. And of battle, Lord Derval, you will have plenty this year." He stopped as the hall door was thrown open, and as Lancelot and his followers stalked in. Bedwin bowed to him, while I merely nodded. The King of Bernewick seemed surprised to see me, but said nothing as he walked to join Arthur, who ordered a third chair arranged on the dais. "Is Lancelot a member of the council now?" I asked Bedwin angrily. "He's a king," Bedwin said patiently. "You can't expect him to stand while we sit." I noticed that the King of Bernewick still had a bandage on his right hand. "I trust the king's wound will mean he can't come with us," I said acidly. I almost confessed to Bedwin how Guinevere had demanded that we elect Lancelot a Mithraist, but decided that news could wait. "He won't come with us," Bedwin confirmed. "He's to stay here, as commander of Durnavaria's garrison." "As what?" I asked loudly, and so angrily that Arthur twisted in his chair to see what the commotion was about. "If King Lancelot's men guard Guinevere and Mordred," Bedwin said wearily, "it frees Lanval's and Llywelyn's men to fight against Gorfyrthid." He hesitated, then laid a frail hand on my arm. "There's something else I need to tell you, Lord Derval." His voice was low and gentle. "Merlin was in Inniswydren last week." "With Nimue?" I asked eagerly. He shook his head. "He never went for her, Derval. He went north instead, but why or where we do not know." The scar on my left hand throbbed. "And Nimue?" I asked, dreading to hear the answer. "Still on the Isle, if she even lives." He paused. "I'm sorry." I stared down the crowded hall. Did Merlin not know about Nimue? Or had he preferred to leave her among the dead? Much as I loved him, I sometimes thought that Merlin could be the cruelest man in all the world. If he had visited Inniswydren, then he must have known where Nimue was imprisoned. Yet he had done nothing. He had left her with the dead. And suddenly my fears were shrieking inside me like the cries of the dying children of Innistribes. For a few cold seconds I could neither move nor speak. Then I looked at Bedwin. "Galahad will take my men north if I don't return," I told him. "Derval!" He gripped my arm. "No one comes back from the Isle of the Dead. No one." "Does it matter?" I asked him. For if all Dumnonia was lost, what did it matter? And Nimue was not dead. I knew that because the scar was pounding on my hand. And if Merlin did not care about her, I did. I cared more about Nimue than I cared about Gorfithid or Ael or the wretched Lancelot with his ambitions to join Mithras's elect. I loved Nimue, even if she would never love me, and I was scar-sworn to be her protector, which meant that I must go where Merlin would not. I must go to the Isle of the Dead. The isle lay only 10 miles south of Durnovaria, no more than a morning's gentle walk. Yet for all I knew of the isle, it could have been on the far side of the moon. I did know it was no island, but rather a peninsula of hard pale stone that lay at the end of a long, narrow causeway. The Romans had quarried the isle, but we quarried their buildings rather than the earth, and so the quarries had closed, and the Isle of the Dead had been left empty. It became a prison. 3 walls were built across the causeway. Guards were set, and to the isle were sent those we wished to punish. In time, we sent others too. Those men and women whose wits had flown and who could not live in peace among us. They were the violent mad, sent to a kingdom of the mad, where no sane person lived and where their demon-haunted souls could not endanger the living. The Druids claimed the isle was the domain of Crom, Duv, the dark crippled god. The Christians said it was the devil's foothold on earth, but both agreed that men or women sent across its causeways' walls were lost souls. They were dead, while their bodies still lived. And when their bodies did die, the demons and evil spirits would be trapped on the isle, so they could never return to haunt the living. Families would bring their mad to the isle, and there, at the third wall, release them to the unknown horrors that waited at the causeway's end. Then, back on the mainland, the family would hold a death feast for their lost relative. Not all the mad were sent to the isle. Some of them were touched by the gods, and thus were sacred, and some families kept their mad locked up, as Merlin had penned poor Pellinore. But when the gods who touched the mad were malevolent, then the isle was the place where the captured soul must be sent. The sea broke white about the isle. At its seaward end, even in the calmest weather, there was a great maelstrom of whirlpools and seething water over the place where Croaken's cave led to the other world. Spray exploded from the sea above the cave, and waves clashed interminably to mark its horrid, unseen mouth. No fisherman would go near that maelstrom, for any boat that did get blown into its churning horror was surely lost. It would sink, and its crew would be sucked down to become shadows in the other world. The sun shone on the day I went to the isle. I carried halbane, but no other war gear, since no man-made shield or breastplate would protect me from the spirits and serpents of the isle. For supplies, I carried a skin of fresh water and a pouch of oatcakes, while for my talismans against the isle's demons, I wore Kynwyn's brooch and a sprig of garlic pinned to my green cloak. I passed the hall where the death feasts were held. The road beyond the hall was edged with skulls, human and animal, warnings to the unwary that they approached the kingdom of dead souls. To my left now was the sea, and to my right a brackish dark marsh where no birds sang. Beyond the marsh was a great shingle bank that curved away from the coast to become the causeway that joined the isle to the mainland. To approach the isle by the shingle bank meant a detour of many miles, so most traffic used the skull-edged road that led to a decaying timber quay, where a ferry crossed over to the beach. A sprawl of wattle guards' houses stood close to the quay. More guards patrolled the shingle bank. The guards on the quay were old men, or else wounded veterans who lived with their families in the huts. The men watched me approach, then barred my path with rusty spears. "My name is Lord Derval," I said, "and I demand passage." The guard commander, a shabby man in an ancient iron breastplate and a mildewed leather helmet, bowed to me. "I am not empowered to stop you passing, Lord Derval," he said, "but I cannot let you return." His men, astonished that anyone would voluntarily travel to the Isle, gaped at me. "Then I shall pass," I said. Then the spearmen moved aside, as the guard commander shouted at them to man the small ferryboat. "Do many ask to pass this way?" I asked the commander. "A few," he said. "Some are tired of living. Some think they can rule an isle of mad people. Few have ever lived long enough to beg me to let them out again." "Did you let them out?" I asked. "No," he said curtly. He watched as oars were brought from one of the huts. Then he frowned at me. "Are you sure, Lord?" he asked. "I'm sure." He was curious, but dared not ask my business. Instead, he helped me down the slippery steps of the quay and handed me into the pitch-blackened boat. "The rowers will let you through the first gate," he told me, then pointed further along the causeway that lay at the far side of the narrow channel. "After that you'll come to a second wall, then a third at the causeway's end. There are no gates in those walls, just steps across. You'll likely meet no dead souls between the walls, but after that, the gods only know. Do you truly want to go?" "Have you never been curious?" I asked him. "We're permitted to carry food and dead souls as far as the third wall, and I've no wish to go farther," he said grimly. "I'll reach the Bridge of Swords to the other world in my own time, Lord." He jerked his chin towards the causeway. "Craken's Cave lies beyond the isle, Lord, and only fools and desperate men seek death before their time." "I have reasons," I said, "and I shall see you again in this world of the living. Not if you cross the water, Lord." I stared at the isle's green and white slope that loomed above the causeway's walls. "I was in a death pit once," I told the guard commander, "and I crawled from there, as I shall crawl from here." I fished in my pouch and found a coin to give him. "We shall discuss my leaving when the time comes." "You're a dead man, Lord," he warned me one last time. "The very moment you cross that channel." "Death doesn't know how to take me," I said with foolish bravado, then ordered the oarsman to row me across the swirling channel. It took only a few strokes. Then the boat grounded on a bank of shelving mud, and we climbed to the archway in the first wall, where the two oarsmen lifted the bar, pulled the gates aside, and stood back to let me pass. A black threshold marked the divide between this world and the next. Once over that slab of blackened timber, I was counted as a dead man. For a second my fears made me hesitate. Then I stepped across. The gates crashed shut behind me. I shivered. I turned to examine the inner face of the main wall. It was 10 feet high, a barrier of smooth stone laid as clean as any Roman work, and so well made that not a single handhold showed on its white face. A ghost fence of skulls topped the wall to keep the dead souls from the world of the living. I said prayers to the gods. I said one to Bel, my special protector, and another to Manawydan, the sea god who had saved Nimue in the past. And then I walked on down the causeway to where the second wall barred the road. This wall was a crude bank of sea-smooth stones that were, like the first wall, topped with a line of human skulls. I went down the steps on the wall's farther side. To my right, the west, the great waves crashed against the shingle, while to my left